Well, hello. It's been a while. My name is Alenka and you're on my channel, YouTube channel, grntre, where I talk about everything book related and everything that is interesting to me. And it's been a while since I've last uploaded a video. That is mainly because a girl has been busy. I finished my university degree and have just started a new job. So there hasn't been that much time for reading, or as much as I would like to have. I upload very sporadically anytime that I just read a good book that I cannot stop thinking about. Lately, I found myself having some time to go over some books again. One of my most anticipated reads this year is Babel by R.F. Kuang. Now, as you can see, this book has definitely been on my mind. These are my annotations. My annotating system, the colors don't really mean anything. I just underline things that I like and then put a little sticker on it so that I can remember where the quote is. Like here, for example, this is what it looks like. Well, let's get into it, shall we? So, I finished Babel about 2 days ago, and since then it has been on my mind constantly, hence why I'm doing this video. I'm still finding it really hard to put into words how much I loved it, but that's why I'm doing this. That's why I'm trying to communicate how much I loved it. And I was actually reading for like 6.5 hours straight and finished the book at like 30 minutes past midnight, and I really had to go to bed because I had to work the next day. But sometimes the book is just too good, and that's a really good sign. So if you don't know anything about Babel or what it's about, or if you've never heard of it, I would describe it as the following. It is a book about the pursuit of knowledge. It is about tortured artists, about people that want to strive for absolute perfection, combined with languages and the Royal National Institute for Translation. It is also combined with a critique of academia in general, and also the imperialism and colonialism of the British Empire, with some fantasy elements. Now, if you hear this, there is a lot going on here, which is definitely a little frightening or like a little intimidating at first, but trust me, once you get into it, it just flows like that. Now, first I want to talk, after that brief little introduction, this is what the cover looks like. I think this is the UK version of the book. It's really beautiful. Also, the illustrations are beautiful, and inside there are also beautiful illustrations, but I will show you those later. I first want to go into the author. The author is R.F. Kuang. Her full name is Rebecca, and you might know her from the Poppy War trilogy. I have not read that series yet, but I will definitely get to it after this. She has actually a master's in Chinese studies from Cambridge and is a translator herself. So this book really is like a reflection of her experiences as well. Now, what is Babel actually about? It plays in the Victorian age. It's about a boy named Robin Swift who was orphaned in China, in Canton, because his mother and all of his relatives had cholera, and they died because of that. He is brought to London by a professor called Professor Lovell, and Professor Lovell is a teacher at the Royal National Institute for Translation, Babel. Once Robin gets to Professor Lovell, takes him in, Robin starts to learn Latin, ancient Greek, and Chinese, all in preparation for the day that he will enroll into the university and into the Royal Institute of Translation, also known as Babel. Now, in this world, Babel is the world center for translation, but is also a world center of silver working. I will go into that more later, but basically it's the art of manifesting meaning lost in translation. And that is the magical effect, and that is where the whole fantasy aspect of this book comes in. The silver working has made the British Empire rich, and that is how they gained all of their advantages. Robin, when he gets to Oxford, he is immediately taken in by everything. He's fascinated by how everything works. It is a fairy tale to him. He counts himself lucky at first, obviously. He's very dedicated to the pursuit of knowledge, and that knowledge obviously serves power, and Babel provides Robin with a certain power. But he is Chinese and he has been raised in Britain, taken away from his homeland. So basically we follow Robin Swift through his upbringing, through his experience at this college. So that is just a little introduction about what this book is all about. If you read dark academia books, and basically this book is labeled dark academia because there is a pursuit of knowledge and it plays at a university, you know that the cast or the main characters are usually very, very white. People of color are rarely seen as main characters in these books, which was very refreshing because the main character is a boy called Robin Swift. The British Empire is using these kids and its imperialism and its colonialism to take children from their countries or children that they need translation from to put them in their institute. They're telling Robin that this is an act of mercy, that all the children should be grateful for this, but they hardly ever had any choice because the other choice would have simply been dying. So you choose life, obviously. Robin at first is very shy, he's holding back, he's always biting down any insults that get thrown his way. He doesn't really engage or like defend himself. He usually just runs away. If there's danger, he's the one that runs. Throughout the book, we see his transformation into breaking free of this shyness and breaking free of this need to constantly back away from situations, and he confronts them head on. Robin's identity basically is defined for so long by the oppressors and colonizers who enforced their ideas of the East and its people on Robin. Next character that is introduced is Ramy, and Ramy basically turns into one of Robin's best friends. He is also a boy studying at the institute. He is from Calcutta, which is the Indian state of West Bengal. Ramy basically kind of is the opposite to Robin in the sense that he's very outgoing, he's very straightforward, he doesn't back up from a fight, kind of hot-headed but in the best way, very sarcastic, and just in all, a very lovable guy, a very lovable character. Then there's Victoire. Victoire was born in Haiti. That's why she speaks the languages. Victoire is very timid at first. Victoire and Letty especially are close, and Ramy and Robin are very close. And there's Letty. She's the only white person of the group, and she is kind of dull and represents white fragility in the sense that she ignores the experiences of her friends when they tell her about them, and she doesn't really believe them most of the time, or doesn't believe the implications that come with the insults that get thrown at them basically. And she does her best to understand, but in the end it just doesn't work. She herself kind of remains in her white fragility and in her white security and in her privileges. They are the four main characters of this book, and they basically form the cohort. They are the new class at Babel, and they have all of their classes together. They all four of them grow very close over the years that they have together, and all of their time studying together. So before I move on into the main plot of the story, I would like to give some overview, a few explanations of how things work in this book. And the first thing that I want to explain is the silver working, because here silver basically is the key to the British Empire. Every device and engineering technique here, like from steam trains to the foundations of buildings, it all relies on silver bars. And these bars work in a way that they are enchanted with so-called match pairs. And these words are in two different languages that mean similar things but with a significant gap between them. Bars kind of create the effect of the difference. They create feelings, noises, speed, stability, color, even depth. Explaining the magic, they say that the magic comes from the sublime, the unnameable, a place where a meaning is created. So basically there's two words that have similar meaning but don't exactly mean the same. A thing that comes to mind to me as a native German speaker and someone that considers English her second mother tongue. For me, one of those words would be fremdschämen, fremdscham in German, and cringe in English. So for me, because cringing is kind of like the effect of ugh, the bar that this would create would kind of like shock the person that uses it, or when the word is spoken kind of has a shock effect, or like that they shake or something like that. That's what I came up with while reading. Is very silly, but kind of this is how the magic works, and that is how everything in England in the Victorian age at that time is stabilized, and that's why England is so rich, because they have all of these resources. Now, if you know the word bubble, you might have heard about it before, or if you're religious, you might have heard the term before, because basically bubble comes from the Hebrew, or from the Bible basically, coming from the Tower of Babel, which is a narrative in Genesis 11:1-9, is an origin myth meant to explain why the world's people speak different languages. So essentially connecting to Bubble, the book. Okay, now we move on to the plot itself. It all starts off when Robin gets taken away from Canton, from China, by Professor Lowell in the hopes of giving him a better life, or that's what he promises Robin. When we first meet Professor Lowell, we don't know what his intentions are. We just know that in this moment he saves a boy that is on the verge of dying. Later we find out that basically Robin didn't have a choice but to go with him, because who chooses death in a life or death situation like that, especially if you're a kid. Robin then ends up in Professor Lowell's home, and there he learns ancient Greek, he learns Latin, he learns to keep up his Chinese. Kind of getting harder than he thought it would. He always thought in the language that he learned first, but then when he had so much contact with English, forgets his mother tongue. Trains for years so that he can get into Oxford. It is not without complication. Robin loves reading, and one day when he is so caught up in a book that he forgets the time, he forgets his lessons. And that is the first time that we see that Professor Lowell has a violent side to him. He's always been very distant to Robin, but there we see his violent side for the first time, because he beats up Robin, and it's written rather gruesomely, and it kind of comes out of left field. Professor Lowell was kind of strange, but you never saw him as like a violent character, and that is one of the first times that you realize something is about to go awfully wrong here. Robin ends up enrolling in Oxford, enrolling in Babel. When he comes to Oxford, he's completely blown away, taken in by the shine of it and the academia and kind of the status that it grants him that he never had before as a Chinese boy in England. One of the quotes here showing how Robin sees it all. He hated this place. He loved it. He resented how it treated him. He still wanted to be part of it, because it felt so good to be part of it, to speak to its professors as an intellectual equal, to be in on the great game. Bubble, or like the students that are enrolled in Bubble, kind of get made fun of by the other students, or the other students in the other programs kind of want to prove themselves, the Bubble students. And one time Robin gets invited into this kind of gentleman's club with one of the most famous boys in the year, and the boy kind of tries to impress Robin with like really bad poetry. Robin then realizes that these guys, they don't care about what they're doing, they're just trying to impress each other, and that kind of opens his eyes, and he really gets sucked into his own self-belief and into his own ego there. His anxiety had dissipated entirely. He no longer felt concerned about how he presented, about whether his jacket was properly buttoned or he'd left crumbs on the side of his mouth. He didn't want Pendennis's approval. He didn't care for any of the boys' approval at all. The truth of this encounter hit him with such clarity that he nearly laughed out loud. They were not appraising him for membership. They were trying to impress him, and by impressing him, to display their own superiority, to prove that to be a bubbler was not as good as being one of Elton Pendennis's friends. These boys were nothing. He could disseminate them with a word if he so desired. Until up to this point, Robin was always kind of insecure about himself and insecure in his abilities. But then there is a switch that then gets sucked into the romanticization and the self-entitlement that academia sometimes lights in some people. He meets his cohort, so the people that will study with him, which I briefly already mentioned. It's Ramy, Victoire, and Letty. They are 4 people. And they meet in this cohort and they really befriend each other. They into a really cool group, and they are all kind of influencing each other about how much they love Babel and at the same time resent it. Victoire, Robin, and Ramy especially. And there are some quotes in this book that I think really capture how they feel. One of them is, they ignored the life of the world. They lived only the life of the mind. They adored it. It really shows how much sucked into it all they get, and how much they want to prove themselves, and how much they want to learn, and how much the pursuit of knowledge is important to them, and how they completely base their self-worth as people onto how they can perform academically, and the whole romanticization of it, and detaching yourself from anything else, and the loneliness that you feel, and kind of that loneliness that you put away once you find these 3 people that you want to spend your life with, because you feel like they are the only ones that understand. And it gets shown in this book. Another quote that really shows the madness again. They were all presently suffering the peculiar madness of the very scared and very determined, madness that made academia feel as dangerous as the battlefield. That is If you've ever like been in an academic setting, you know that this hits hard, especially if you are in like a humanities study. It interests you and you can do research and can you tell that I study sociology and gender studies? Because I relate to this experience, and it can be good, but it can also be very, very bad, which I think is shown here particularly well. They are also, the friend group itself, they also have some beautiful moments, and I think this quote especially really shows how much they truly value each other, how much Robin values the friend group, because the whole story is out of his perspective. If only one could engrave entire memories in silver, thought Robin, to be manifested again and again for years to come, not the cruel deterioration of the daguerreotype type, but a pure and impossible distillation of emotions and sensations. For simple ink on paper was not enough to describe his golden afternoon, the warmth of uncomplicated friendship, all fights forgotten, all sins forgiven, the sunlight melting away the memories of the classroom chill, the sticky taste of lemon on their tongues, and their startled, delighted relief. This was shortly after they had taken their exams, which determined if they could continue to study or not, and when they all found their way back to each other after weeks of intense studying. So it really shows that even though academia completely drives you away from your friends, from your family, from what you thought you were as a person, it brings you together with the people that are experiencing the same thing, which I think is a very peculiar thing and really interestingly written here. So another really important thing in this book is the Hermes Society. Now, the Hermes Society is basically an underground group of ex-Babel students, or mostly ex-Babel students, that want to fight against the colonialism and imperialism that it represents or still reproduces, or actively produces. Well, one night Robin is being attacked, or like Robin and Ramy are being attacked for looking different. Ramy drops his book and Robin goes back to get it because he is the one that can pass as a white person in the dark. He stumbles upon a group of people that are stealing something, and when he approaches them, one of them says a word, and upon this word they all disappear. Robin disappears with them, and that is one of the silver bars at work. I will read you the passage what Robin feels, experiences the silver working on himself. No, disappeared was not quite the word for it. Robin didn't have the words for it. It was lost in translation, a concept that neither the Chinese nor the English could fully describe. They existed, but in no human form. They were not merely beings that couldn't be seen. They weren't beings at all. They were shapeless. They drifted, expanded. They were the air, the brick walls, the cobblestones. Robin had no awareness of his body, where he ended and the bar began. He was the silver, the stones, the night. So one thing leads to another, and Robin ends up joining the Hermes Society and helping stealing texts from Babel to the Hermes Society. The funny thing is, one of the guys working for Hermes Society and one of the guys that he met on that day is actually Robin's half-brother, Griffin, he's called. Robin joins the group, but he barely knows anything. They barely tell him any information. All he does is steal the texts and move on at this point. During their time at Babel, Victoire, Ramy, and Robin repeatedly get treated differently because they're people of color. I don't want to go into it too much for myself here because obviously I'm a white person and I don't feel really my place to speak about these incidents in detail because they're awful, and I feel like that's really reserved for people of color to share their experiences, and I don't think I need to add on to that. But there are multiple instances in this book where this happens, and it's basically one of the main plot driving points because in the end it shows that no matter what, Ramy, Victoire, and Robin can never be part of Oxford. They will never be treated the same. And even Letty, she feels sometimes that she herself is also not the same because she's a woman, but she doesn't realize that because she's a white woman, she has immense privilege still. One thing leads to another, and one day Robin kind of stumbles upon Ramy and Victoire also stealing for the Hermes Society in Babel, and he kind of takes the blame for them so that they can escape. Robin ends up being interrogated by Professor Lowell, who is his dad. That's what Griffin told him at the Hermes Society meeting. And he gets interrogated by Professor Lowell, and he gets directly asked if it's about the Hermes Society, which Robin did not expect. But he doesn't lie to Professor Lowell, and he tells him what he did. And to Robin's surprise, he's not getting expelled or thrown out or completely disinherited. He is allowed to stay at Babel and he's allowed to continue his studies. Professor Lowell kind of gives him a second chance. Like a week later or something, it's the first time that Victoire, Letty, and Ramy and Robin get to go on one of the translators' voyages to the country of their mother tongue to help settle a situation there. So that happens shortly after, and Robin suspects that it's kind of a disciplining matter from Professor Lowell to show him the real power that he has over him and that he has given him a second chance and that he should appreciate it. At this time of the book, they are actively in their studies. They are learning silver making. They are doing everything in their power. They are sent to Canton. Silver magic is what makes everything happen here, as I said. And the greatest event it causes here, or where the novel turns and is going away from the classic studying novel, First Opium War. The British Empire is endlessly hungry for more silver, and in order to get it, it becomes a huge drug cartel, grows poppies in India, and forces China to buy the opium. Young Babel translators, so Ramy, Victoire, Robin, and Letty, are being sent to China and become hopelessly tangled in the problem of whether to serve the corrupt institute that has given them opportunity and education or their own people. And this is kind of the conflict that Robin especially goes through, because he also has to translate while he is there. And he ends up learning that no matter what he does, everything has already been predestined, and no matter what, Britain will go to war. They had already decided that, and what they were doing right now is finding a reason to justify it to the Congress. Once Robin finds that out, he basically tells the Chinese, I don't want to say emperor, but Chinese leader, that that's what Britain is, and basically ruins the chances for Britain to continue their things, because the leader then decides to burn the opium and they have to quickly leave the country. And once that they're on the boat back home to Britain, Robin really understands that he has just been an instrument, and he confronts Professor Lowell about this. There is a quote that goes as the following: "He had become so good at holding two truths in his head at once, that he was an Englishman and not, that Professor Lowell was his father and not, that the Chinese were a stupid, backwards people and that he was also one of them, that he hated Babel and wanted to live forever in its embrace. He had danced for years and years on the razor's edge of these truths, had remained there as a means of survival, a way to cope, unable to accept either side fully, because an unflinching examination of the truth was so frightening that the contradictions threatened to break him. He could not go on like this. He could not exist a split man, his psyche constantly erasing and rearranging the truth. He felt a great pressure in the back of his mind. He felt like he would quite literally burst unless he stopped being double, unless he chose." So here is clearly the internal struggle of Robin for like standing up for his people and standing up for Babel. And they only ever use the silver bars, and this is very important, they only ever use the silver bars for the benefit of the rich in London and England in general, and to the detriment of those translators that must leave behind their colonized homelands. And this is really where Robin realizes translation is a way to bring people together. In the end, that act of translation is always the act of betrayal, or the act of translation is always an act of violence. That is really the changing point, because Robin ends up killing Professor Lowell with a silver bar that is used to explode things. And before he does that, there's one quote that really captures this very well. "Anger was a chokehold. Anger did not empower you. It sat on your chest, it squeezed your ribs until you felt trapped, suffocated, out of options. Anger simmered, then exploded. Anger was constriction, and the consequent rage a desperate attempt to breathe. And rage, of course, came from madness." And it was not until Professor Lowell fell onto the floor that Robin realized what he had done. Ramy, Letty, and Victoire basically find Robin and find the body, and they end up helping him get rid of the body. Definitely changes the group, especially Letty. They end up sticking to each other. They hatch a plan that they throw the body overboard and tell everyone that Professor Lowell had a disease. Will act like nothing happened once they get back to Oxford. Once they get back, everything seems normal, but they quickly realize that it isn't, and they quickly realize that no matter what, they won't ever fit in. They go to a party, and then all of a sudden, out of nowhere, another professor asks Robin about the Hermes Society, and Robin realizes, smart boy that he is, that it's a trap, and that they know. So they basically flee, all of the four of them flee, and hide, go underground with the Hermes Society. And that is the point where they realize that no matter what they do, they will never be part of Babel again. So there is one quote that really illustrates this. The lights that shone through arched windows still promised warmth, old books and hot tea within still suggested an idyllic scholar's life where ideas were abstract entertainments that could be banded without consequences. But the dream was shattered, that dream that had always been founded on a lie. None of them had ever stood a chance of truly belonging here, for Oxford wanted only one kind of scholar, the kind born and bred to cycle through past posts of power it had created for itself. Everyone else it chewed up and discarded. These towering edifices were built with coin from the sale of slaves, and the silver that kept them running came from bloodstain from the mines of Potosi. It was smelted in choking forges where native laborers were paid a pittance before making its way on ships across the Atlantic to where it was shaped by translators ripped from their countries, stolen to his faraway land and never truly allowed to go home. They find home in the Hermes Society and end up meeting a lot of people that used to be at Babel or were presumed dead at Babel. They try their best because they found documents where everything is confirmed that the war was always going to be happening no matter what they did, and the British Empire needed a reason to do this, and that's why they went to Canton in China to kind of inflict this aggravation and to make them act out. Hatch a plan, the Hermes Society, to stop the war by bringing it to Congress. They form a plan to influence Congress with pamphlets, with lobbying, with all of that. But before they can do that, a huge act of betrayal happens, that Letty has betrayed the Hermes Society and betrayed all of her friends. Basically, the police or Babel or whoever storms the Hermes Society and almost kills every one of them. And one of the craziest things is that Letty actually shoots Ramy. And the thing is, Letty always kind of had a crush on Ramy, and Ramy always rejected her. And one time in the book it is written that Letty was so ashamed that a brown boy rejected her that she could not take it, and that was insane to read. Basically everyone from the Hermes Society is killed that day, and Robin and Victoire get kidnapped by Babel, and Robin especially gets tortured relentlessly for information, but he doesn't really give it out, and Victoire is just thrown into a cell and made to believe that she died. And the same for Robin, they are like playing main games with them. Griffin, the brother of Robin, ends up saving them both, but he also dies in the end, and Robin and Victor both survive, but they are obviously shell of people at this point. They don't realize what has happened, they don't want to believe what happened, and they're insanely shaken, and they end up hatching a plan, which was actually Griffin's plan, which was to take hostage of Babel Tower and stop all of the workings of silver immediately. To do this, they would simply have to have all the Babel students inside and force them to go outside and not come back in. And how they do this is that Babel has a security system with each of the students' blood, and when this blood gets crushed, it is in little vials. When they get crushed, they can't come back inside without being shot like 1,000 times. And that was originally Griffin's plan, but everyone said that you can't do this by enforcing more violence. Victoire and Robin decide to do it that way, and they actually actively and successfully take Babel Tower and seize any silver working done there. And it is the main center of silver working in the whole of England. So if Babel shuts down, the whole of England is gonna come falling down. If the Congress or British Empire stops the war, that they will continue their silver work. England doesn't cease, and neither do they. So some students and professors stay at Babel, even when they're given the choice to leave and just not return. So everything in England starts to fail and fall, and first the tower in Oxford falls, lamps go out, buildings give out, and it's chaos. And it adds on, but they continue doing it, and they continue not doing their silver work, and it shows how much the British Empire was relying on all of the colonial and imperialistic work behind it. They get threatened multiple times that they say that if they don't open up, they will bring the army, they will kill them, they will do whatever, but they stay. Robin has at this point greatly changed and he's very much ready to risk it all. One of the quotes that is said is, "Power did not lie in the tip of a pen. Power did not work against its own interests. Power could only be brought to heel by acts of defiance it could not ignore, with brute, unflinching force, with violence." And that is what they do. They use violence at everything that collapses. England doesn't seem to do anything about it until Westminster Bridge falls. And when Westminster Bridge falls, because why it's called violence is that it's connected with a lot of people that die. And Westminster Bridge falls. That is when England has nothing left to lose. So that is when they decide to storm Babel, and Robin sees the only way to make a point and to stop them from doing what they did and doing all these wars and taking away children is by completely destroying Babel. And the way he's going to do it is that one word that cannot be put onto the silver bars is the word translate, because that is an oxymoron in itself. It doesn't work, and the bar starts to vibrate and gets really loud and eventually kind of explodes, or like not explodes, but it just loses complete control. And what he does, or what the group decides to do, is do many silver bars of the translate, and then Robin says translate, and eventually it would trigger a chain reaction, and that would mean that one has to stay behind to trigger the translation, and it can't just be one person, it has to be multiple people. They have a chat in the group, and Robin decides to stay. Victoire decides to leave, and some more people decide to stay, and it's a very bittersweet ending because Robin truly says translate at the end, and the bars start to vibrate, and the whole Tower of Babel comes down. So that is where the story ends. That is the whole plot of Babel. Let's all take a breather. As you realize, this book is heavy. And when I first heard about this, it had been brought to my attention because it was a dark academia book. And I've come to the point where I don't like when books are labeled after their aesthetic or after their tropes. I like it more when books are labeled genres, because I feel like it has been sensationalized so much that people just go for tropes instead of stories. And I don't really like that. But in this case, I think the term is perfect because it attracts all of the readers that read dark academia books, which includes The Secret History. And if you know my channel, you know that I absolutely love The Secret History. But Babel, and R.F. Kuang says this, Babel is a thematic response from R.F. Kuang to The Secret History. And to be quite honest, it is what I needed to hear, and I wish in hindsight that I had gone more into the problematic aspects of the romanticization of academia that Donna Tartt does in her book. I mean, I've gone into it, but I wish that I had gone into it more and made it more clear that it could have been done in a way that was more tasteful to people of color. But again, this is not, I don't want to go back, and because I still love The Secret History. I still think it's an amazing book, and it's still my favorite book. But Babel kind of opened my eyes to how it could be, because this book attracts people that read The Secret History and eventually makes you question, yes, The Secret History is a book of privilege. It is what it critiques, and there's a very soft line, and it can be misinterpreted if you don't understand the whole plot of The Secret History. And Babel kind of adds nuance onto this topic in a really great way. It is one of the best books I have ever read, I will say. I think it's far too clever for me, but I have learned so much when it comes to translation and languages, and the author does a perfect job of introducing you into the story and the principle of languages, even if you haven't heard of any of the theories before. And it is complicated. I'm not saying that it isn't. I had to get into the whole silverworking thing and all of the translation things, but it was very fascinating to read. And it is a scholarly book because, as I said, Kuang is a translator herself, and there's a lot of footnotes in this book adding information onto the main story. The book itself is such a critique of academia, how they exploit the people most vulnerable, and I love how the author builds up everything for the reader first, just to watch it all fall down. It's beautiful, and especially Letty is such a good characterization of white fragility in this book. the way she talks, the way she carries herself, it's white fragility, and it's also white feminism, in a sense that is not intersectional, and that she only sees like her struggle as a woman, which, don't get me wrong, that is also a category of like a minority, but she's still white and she still has the privilege of all of that, and she fails to understand what her friends are going through. And it's written beautifully in this book, because you grow to like them all. And when Letty does her, like the way she speaks or the way she tries to make her friends understand, you just roll your eyes and you're like, Letty, please just come to terms that it's not easy for your friends. And it's what I needed to read. And this has been a whole mess, this video, because I'm still trying to put it into words, but I hope you understand what I mean and why I love it so much. And as I said, I am a native German speaker, so that I can hardly convey what I want to say, I think fits perfectly into translation and into the violence it conveys. And since English is my second language, there are words in German that do not exist in English, and I think that is absolutely beautiful. And this novel, apart from anything else that I've mentioned, has also given me a new perspective on being a bilingual speaker and the amount of opportunities and things that come with translations, and has just opened a whole new perspective for me. So yeah, that is Babel for you. If you have not read it yet, I would definitely recommend you go give it a read if you haven't guessed that by yet. But yeah, that has been my review. I hope you enjoyed it. If you did, leave a like, a comment, and to subscribe. Let me know in the comments what you thought of Babel, if you've read this book, if you liked it, if you didn't like it. That is it from me. If you have any more relevant things, let me know in the comments below, and I wish you a nice evening, or well, it's evening here, but a nice day or evening wherever you are, and I'll see you in the next video. Bye!